Welcome to the Reality Show Life Coach Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about season 45, episode 8 of Survivor. And with me today, I have special guest Christina Arnold. Christina, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there. I am a general life coach for women physicians. I help them become happy in medicine and relationships and in their home. And I love Survivor and everything reality TV based.
And I know that on your own podcast, you've recently started covering some reality TV shows. Am I right about this?
Oh, this has been a dream of mine because I have always been obsessed with TV. And my husband's like, why don't you just coach them? Just get on your podcast and do it. And so, but in my mind, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. And so I just have been delaying doing it. And then I came across you and your podcast. I was like, wait a minute. We could just make this so much fun. Just could be so like just the highlights, what I think, just like I love how you put this together and what you've created. And
Oh,
so I
thank
did
you.
one recap of 90 Day Fiance, which is my favorite reality show.
Can you believe this? I have never seen 90 Day Fiance. Like, I think I just get into my favorites. And so that is definitely on the list because every person I mention reality TV to, they're like, well, have you seen my 90 Day Fiance? You must watch this. So obviously, I
Well,
need to
be
watch it.
careful because there's so many franchises that if you get into it, you might not ever get out of it. There's so much to watch, but I really do enjoy it.
It's a delightful problem to have, I think. um, how did you get into Survivor?
I watched it when it first came out. So I'm like an OG of reality TV. So I
Mm,
saw what was it called back then? MTV was the first one that did a
Real world.
reality show. I don't even Real World, right? So I started watching
Yeah.
Real World and then Survivor and Big Brother. All of those started coming out around that similar time. I just have always liked reality TV. It's so interesting. Maybe it's the coach in us, like the idea of observing human behavior is fascinating. And so Survivor gives you that glimpse plus there's some competitive elements to it. And yeah, so much to relate
Yeah.
to. So interesting. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what they're going to say. Like the title of this episode, I just loved it. Following a dead horse to water. Like I've never heard that before. And that's such a great expression. You'll never get there if you follow a dead horse. What a clever way to say it. You just learn so much about life too by watching people.
Totally. Yeah, you're right. Those are the elements I pick up on too. And it's just like so fun to just kind of zone out sometimes and watch people doing fun things on TV. So, all right. Well, this episode was bonkers. Like so much happened. We have so much to talk about today. I'll do a quick recap and then we'll go from there. So, we start out, we get back to camp. Sifu and Caleb were sent home last week, so they were still reeling from this. Um, the women have done math and they have realized it's 6'4" women on the beach. So they're contemplating a women's alliance, which I think kind of helps to throw a curveball for what happens later in the episode. While they're just hanging on the beach, this boat arrives. And I don't know, did you know what was about to happen when the boat was coming on
Saw the
shore?
previews from last week. The
Oh
Survivor
yeah.
auction was coming back, so I sort of guessed that was happening.
Yeah. So they have the auction, but there's so many like new fun twists. I think this is actually like the best iteration that they could have done. Like first they have to go run through the jungle and find their money. So it means they're not starting on an equal playing foot. Playing foot? That's probably not right. It doesn't matter. And then they have like twists in terms of there's not going to be advantages there. Like nobody could have strategized this auction because it's completely different than they've ever done the auctions. Bruce loses his vote, but that turns out to not matter because in the immunity challenge, Bruce wins immunity. So it doesn't really matter anyway. He's safe. They have an option to sit out if they want to get rice. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. There's a little bit of a shock there. And then when they go to tribal, this was probably the most viscerally I've ever felt a blindside. Kelly is blindsided and sent home instead of who I thought was going to go, which was Jake.
I think
What did
Jake
you
was
think of
pretty
this
surprised
episode?
too.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
no
He's like,
one
oh my
was
God,
more
I'm here to see
surprised
another
than
day.
Jake. Yeah, this was a packed episode. I was sad to see Sifu and Caleb going, but it's particularly Sifu. So it was just kind of I was still like, oh no, he's gone. And,
Yeah.
I love that they brought the Survivor auction back. I thought that brought in so and to watch their like, if you could have watched this portion of the show on mute, it would have just been just as entertaining as or just to see their faces. Their faces were so dramatic. It was such an exciting moment for them. They were starving, and this is such a classic Survivor bucket list. And there's always opportunities to advance yourself in the game. For example, if you get a high protein food, you might be feeling so much
Yeah.
better. If you get to invite other people to it, you get to kind of curry favor with them. So we got to see all of that at play. And who doesn't like a good blindside?
Oh, I know. Like, oh, did I like it? I don't know because I loved Kelly, but at the same time, it was like, I don't know, the just the way they presented it was so interesting. Well, I suspect we will talk about that, but what makes sense? Let's see. Where do we want to start? I mean, we could start with the auction if we wanted to. Kind of talked about it a little bit, but what did you like? I think what's interesting about this is like when you have standard survivor things, usually people are like, okay, well, here's my strategies, here's what I'm going to do with it. But this was completely different. And they weren't given any time to actually contemplate what they were going to do, which I think is a kind of an interesting way to throw people into things. Like, how do you think like people handled this?
I think when we don't have rules, it gets very primal. So, for example, during I think it was Kelly who said, just run, Bruce. Who cares? Just run. And so you just get that part of your brain gets lit up. We don't know what's going on, but we're going to be running from there to there, which I just thought that's what we were seeing. And I think Kendra described it. I thought, or my note for that was that Kendra won the strategy at the end. She's like, just use all your money. That's the strategy.
Right.
And so I thought that was beautiful that she just like 320 pretzels, give them to me. And,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree with that. Actually, the primal is probably the best word that you could have used here because it really did feel primal. Like they just had to go. There was like no time to think. There's no time to react. It was just like whatever your first thought is, just go with it. Um, Curious that Bruce's first thought was just to hang back and like shake sand out of his shoes. I don't know about that as a strategy. Like, where do you think that mindset came from?
When I watched it, I thought this seems so on brand for Bruce because he has
Oh,
separated himself out as like he started as I'm going to be Uncle Bruce, or he's really like said, so he is, it feels like he always looks to be the person who's kind of on the edge of things. So, which I don't think is necessarily a great strategy, which is why I don't think he can win is because he doesn't seem to value like the relationship piece that of building an alliance of people who trust and want to help you advance your game. Like that piece he's missing because he wants to always be kind of out on his own a little bit. So that to me, I wasn't surprised by.
yeah. I was a little like, I thought it was interesting, and maybe this is where a little bit of my surprise came in that, like, usually, I don't know, I'm just imagining a situation where everybody else is running frantically and you're not. Like, you must, and this is maybe where, like, Bruce, you can just tell he thinks differently, is because ordinarily it would be like, oh my gosh, I should run too. Like, nobody knows what's happening. Everybody is running. It's like the house is on fire. And he's all like, let me just slowly put my shoes on
Let me get the
here.
sand out of my shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
just like, okay. Um, I mean, obviously Keturah loves this because when his bucket is empty, she's like, this is amazing. He's gonna lose. I mean, ultimately he does, um, but I mean, it is interesting the way that, yeah, they have no way to prepare for this, and they probably all thought it was gonna go one way. Like, okay, now you have Dee who has $900. She's probably thinking like, I'm gonna get all the advantages. I'm gonna get a pile of food. I'm gonna do this and that. And I mean, Jeff throws a massive curveball that they just have to come up within a second of how they're going to respond to it.
Which I thought was fascinating. So I had a guess that they took away the Survivor auction. I was like, why are they doing this? This is so interesting. So I did a little background reading if I could just
Mm,
nerd out a moment. My
absolutely.
theory on this was that this was a political, like this might have been a culturally insensitive way because you have, for example, people who are being given, or like there's up for auction, they reveal fish eyes or bat soup or something that's a to that culture, a delicacy, and then you have all these people, like, throwing up in the background, like, that might be
Oh,
culturally insensitive, that's why they took it away. But clearly, as we see, that's not the why, because they had the fish eyes and the whole experience, and the background reading was they took the auction out because Jeff Probst said that there were less viewership on that part of the segment because everyone was holding their money for the advantage. So there weren't people engaging in the auction. Everyone was just holding all of their money for the advantage. So they brought the auction back, but they took the advantages away, and they incentivized them to use the money, which made it so much more interesting. And also they had the element of you don't know when they're going to stop the auction. And if you have money, whoever has the most money is going to lose their vote. So they really created a lot of fear around it, or
wow.
excitement, made it so much more interesting. So I agree with you. It was a brilliant way to bring the auction back.
And just while you were talking about that, I was thinking about how a lot of people in like everyday life would be like, well, this thing isn't working. Let's scrap it entirely. And this is maybe one of the things I like about Survivor. They're like, no, no, no. The general idea of the auction is great. There's just elements of this that aren't working. So let's just workshop out how we could do this differently. It's one of the things that I like about Survivor. Like, I don't know about you, but it actually sometimes helps me think about business differently, like
Mm.
running a business, because it's like you could just be like, well, this doesn't work. Nobody bought this thing. And it's just like, no, no, no. Maybe the general idea is okay, but there's an element of it that we could tweak and change and test
Mm.
and adapt rather than just throwing it out completely. Um, and I just feel like there's so many elements, especially in this new version of Survivor, where they do that. They're like, let's not throw it out completely, but let's just change it just enough so that
I
people
think
relate to
that's
it differently.
right. I think that's why Survivor's done so well for so long, is because they change it and it's in unexpected ways and it feels new and different. So it is interesting, like what of that can we take for our own business in terms of keep what's working and thinking about how can we change and up level and grow and consider new ideas and new ways to make keep our business feeling new and fresh and have energy around it. I love
Yeah.
that.
But I think it's also anchored on something that's familiar. Because if you change dramatically, people would be like, who is this person that I know and love and I've been following for so long, but it's still anchored in something that people
Mhm.
know. We know the
Right.
auction.
Yeah.
We're not on the outs
Mhm.
now as viewers. We're like lifelong Survivor fans and we
Right.
still get it. There's still a wink at what we know, but it's just like,
Mhm.
hey, we're all adapting together. Um, I'll be curious to see how they handle this in season 46. My guess is that they'll run this again just because the cast in that season won't have known the new twists and
Mm.
turns of it.
Mhm.
I feel like they like to do that just to see, like, okay, this group of people responded in this way. It's like an A/B test. Like they responded this way. The next cast, how did they respond? So we'll
Yeah, that
see.
would be my guess. They would bring it back too, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. There was one moment where Jake got cake and he
Yeah.
had to share it. And I was like, his choices there were a little bit interesting because he had Bruce and then he had Julie, who he had just tried to vote off in the last episode. I was like, I feel like he's trying to curry favor here by rewarding them. I'm like, I don't know how far it actually went, but that was like the only
Yes.
thing where maybe there was some strategy, more strategy involved, I thought.
Mhm. It looked like he was trying to make up for last week.
I mean, if you're going to do it
That
with
cake
anything,
looked
cake.
good. Yeah.
It looks so good.
I
Absolutely.
was hoping Katura would have gotten a bite since she was not feeling the fish eyes much. I was hoping she'd get some
Oh,
calories, but
and the sound effects when Austin took a
oh,
big bite of the fish eyes.
that
I
could
was like, I
not
can't
have. I was
watch.
like, someone ate an apple and they are just replaying it over the fish eyes.
It had to have
It was
been. Yeah.
way too intense.
Oh no, I couldn't even watch it. I'm also like a known person for just covering my eyes through anything uncomfortable. So, but it's like it is interesting how when we watch TV though, sometimes it just brings up our own feelings. It's like a good way to practice feeling feelings, I suppose, because it's a safe zone.
Right. Yes,
Yeah,
lots of feelings in this episode.
totally. All right. Any other thoughts on the auction before we move on?
Bring that auction back. I enjoyed it. That was good stuff. I like the less rules and less know you really get to see them and their instincts kind of at play. So I loved it.
I love it too because it's like Some of their ideas do crash and burn. They like try so many things and some of them fail completely. I mean, this was a total win, but sometimes you see things on the show where you're like, that didn't work. Don't bring that back ever again. So it's fun to see the playfulness there. Let's see, where should we go next? You have a cool note here about the Kelly Bruce relationship. Do you want to talk about that part?
Mm, Ellie and Bruce. Yes. So I think, let's see. Kelly says, Bruce has been dragging my game down. You don't want to keep living with someone who's inhibiting your gameplay in any way. And that was a very interesting. I don't know if I've seen that dynamic too much on reality show where someone feels attached in like their game is being maybe a little bit on Big Brother, Suri with her son. There was a little bit of, gosh, Suri was like, this is not
Mm.
working. The mom was
She is
like,
kind of attached to her son, though.
his play is just too aggressive for me. So maybe you have seen it, but not, it's not been a very constant theme. And so I thought it was a really interesting remark that she made. And I think there's coaching opportunities here to like question some of that. What if, yes. So her response was, well, Bruce is telling everybody I'm his number one. So everyone thinks we're really close. And I got to get him out of the game. And for sure that is an option, but there are
Mm.
so many other options where she could have been advocating for her gameplay, or she could even told Bruce, listen, we got to keep our alliance quieter. It might be threatening people. Or she could be telling people, don't listen to
Yeah.
him. I'm actually not that aligned to him, or whatever the case is. But I thought that was an interesting choice that she was making. And she says later in the episode, Bruce is so dangerous. And I don't know, maybe because I thought I'm not really sure I understand what the danger part is because it seems like almost everybody wants him out. So I wasn't sure what it sees, but it made sense if she thinks that Bruce is dangerous, that she wouldn't want to disturb his like
Mm.
vision of reality of the relationship.
Yeah. Why do you think Kelly hasn't like advocated for herself to either to have a different relationship with Bruce or to just not be in alliance with him at all?
My guess is that there's some people pleasing here ish kind of stuff. Like she's playing a very socially safe game where and maybe that's not people pleasing at all. That just might be a very smart strategy. Is that she keeps everyone, she's in a relationship with everyone, which makes her a dangerous player
Right.
because everyone kind of trusts her and likes her.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I was talking to a friend about this, is that like maybe Kelly just doesn't have the perspective that we do. And obviously, she doesn't have the perspective we do as the audience that like everyone really likes her
Mm,
and they seem to want to work with her. There's lots of comments throughout the season of like, oh man, I
right.
really want to work with Kelly. I can totally work with her. Um, but maybe she doesn't see that. Like maybe she doesn't see that. And like her thought is, well, I guess I'm stuck with Bruce, whether I like it or not, because he has like pinned his ribbon on me and now I am aligned with him. Like maybe
It's
a little
interesting.
victim-y.
It's interesting. I think she's a person who's used to be well liked. And so she does not, this idea of not being in a good relationship with Bruce, even though Bruce isn't well liked, is one that's
Mm.
very uncomfortable for her. And it
Oh.
would have been an interesting question is like, why do they all like, what is it about? What do you think is about Kelly that everyone is so drawn to her?
Oh my gosh. I guess I didn't really consider this. It's interesting because I almost take it as a fact when people are like, "Oh, that is a likable person on here," but that's not true. The same person with a different cast of tribe members could totally be on the outs or completely likable, but they just decide they're too dangerous and they don't want to work with them. So what is it about her? I I don't know. It's weird because it's like when you see it, you're like, "Yeah, of course, Kelly." But it isn't really until this episode where people thought she was more on the dangerous side of things. I don't
And
know.
I want to question that too. I had that thought as well. As I was thinking about the episode later, I remember when I watched the episode in real time, I was like, ooh, Drew is a genius here that he saw this on
Mm,
the beach and he brings it up. As I was thinking about the episode, I was like, actually, now there might be a lot of editing issues here, but earlier in the episode, Kelly says, all right, who are we splitting this vote with? Or she's like, who is the other person? It's got to be me, right? Because I'm so close to Bruce. So she is reiterating the narrative Bruce is putting out there that she doesn't want to see, which
yeah.
is interesting. And I think in reality TV, a theme you see a lot is once one person says a name, everyone tends to go with that name because it's less blood on their hands. So I
Mm,
wonder if it really did happen that order when Kelly said she would be the next. She said something to the effect that she kind of made it
yeah.
like obvious that she would be picked. It became easier. It kind of like got planted in people's mind. Okay, well, if we have to split, it's going to be Kelly. So it had me wonder, like, did Drew make as bold of a move as the editing makes it seem to believe, or did they all just kind of go with Kelly's own suggestion of
Mm.
herself? Oh,
Oh,
I
so
don't know.
interesting.
What do you
Because
think?
I wonder if they're going to show some flashbacks next week because
Yeah.
I mean, the editing on this episode, like I felt blindsided when she was sent. Like I was like, like how did wait, what? I thought it was going to be Jake. And so it I mean, that felt super intentional that we, were led to believe it was going to be Jake. Usually they let us in a little bit more than they did on this episode, but oh man, Christina, I'm still stuck on your question of what makes Kelly so likable.
Yeah, tell
Like
me.
what makes her want to work with her?
Yeah.
Um I don't I'm wondering if it's like it must just be her genuine way of communicating with people or some way in which she's able to like make somebody instantly trust her. Maybe I mean maybe it's her work. I think she's a nurse.
She's an ICU nurse. I was about to
Yes.
say, I think that line of work, it pulls for people who can handle very stressful situations. And I mean, my take on this is that she's not like this. She's physically good in challenges, but she is not a physical beast threat. But
Mm,
where her strength is my guess is that she just has a very high emotional intelligence, and she's able to have an individual relationships with people where they trust her, and she's able to think further ahead and kind of map out people's personalities, and she's sort of a chameleon, and it
mm,
lends people to trust her. So, and she's just not. She doesn't seem to have threat. She seems to be sort of a peacemaker. So when you see her
yeah.
in conversations, it's a very balanced conversation. It feels I could see why people would like her, would be drawn to her.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe all of her training of just being able to be like this calm, grounding source, like, and have that type of energy with people. Like, I mean, I can imagine that when you're on an island and you have like several people who are really like scared and paranoid, some who are just like really high energy and like a lot to be around, to have
Yeah,
somebody who's just like calm and grounding and chill, you're just like, ah, like maybe your nervous system calms down too. And like, I wonder if there's like just human to human bonding that's happening in those ways where you're like, I just feel like I can trust her and I don't know why.
that's interesting. It makes me think when I think about other people who've gone very far in reality shows or other survivors, like it is a common theme among the women, a common theme among the winners. I'm thinking of Suri, for example, who's won,
Mm,
I don't know how many times in reality shows, but she's just got this, she's more of a maternal figure, but it is this calming, solid, grounding figure that people I would guess are sort of desperate for when you haven't eaten for weeks and you've been without
mhm,
loved ones in contact, you're not sleeping well. That must be I could imagine why people would be drawn to that.
mhm. Yeah, and I think and maybe the reason her name hasn't come up yet is it didn't occur to people to bring her name up.
Mm.
Like, it's almost like
Mhm.
not thinking about her as a threat until her name was brought up and be like, "Oh, you're right. Everyone does like her." It's almost like maybe it's the first time they realized that not only does she have a relationship with me, she has a relationship with everybody else on the island, whereas
Yes.
it felt
Yeah.
individualistic before that.
The other thing I think is a common theme in reality shows is if you can't get one person out, like Bruce, who everybody wants out,
Mm.
as an immunity necklace, then you go for his number one because you
Mhm.
find a way to weaken his game. And so if they really are, and we have Couture in the background, like really, we need to be thinking about Bruce, y'all. And I think they're all agreeing that you can't get him out. She becomes, if everyone thinks she's close to him, she becomes a target.
Yeah, but at the same time, I really still get the impression the reason they want Bruce out is because he's annoying. Like, not from a strategy point of view, so I'm just like,
For
why are they even
sure.
focused here?
For sure. I would think players like Bruce, though, they are dangerous players because if you don't get him out on week one, they often go all the way. Because the
That's true.
players who are very strategic, very physical, they're gonna be like, "I wanna be sitting next to someone like Bruce, who everyone hates." And so he
True.
has a good chance of going far because his personality that's annoying also can be his biggest asset in terms of if the top players are thinking, "I wanna sit by a Bruce at the end."
Yeah. Why do you think people aren't looking at Drew or Austin? Because they have a very strong alliance. I don't know if it's known, but to me, when I see like interviews with them, I'm like, guys, you should really, really be like looking over here too.
That is so good. Who knows if editing's a part of it? I think Bruce takes up so much oxygen that everyone is just kind of, like, fascinated with everything he says and does and doesn't do, that people are focused on him and not seeing the peripheral edges as much.
Oh, like
What
he's
do you
the elephant in the room, essentially. That
Right.
like everybody's like, we are looking and talking about the
We
elephant in the
can't
room.
stop talking about him.
Right.
Let's right, the first thing we talk about he's just so interesting. He's such a fascinating character, and which is great to have around if you're Austin and Drew because you can kind of deflect onto him. But yeah, it could come at the expense of everyone else if they don't see that I agree. Drew, Austin, and Emily are gonna be bigger threats.
Big threats.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think they showed this in the episode, but I mean, Austin had a lot of motivation to get Kelly out because her being gone and Jay being gone means that his amulet has power and he has an idol now
Ooh, I
because of that
forgot about
three-way.
that.
Yeah. I was surprised they didn't bring that up, but I was like,
Um,
he had a lot of, I mean, so he might have behind the scenes been like, yeah, Drew, we should get Kelly out. But I don't, does
interesting.
anybody know about this three-way amulet? That was the part I couldn't remember.
I don't get the impression of that. Is there anybody else? Does D also have part of the amulet? No.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I think all the power now goes to
Mm.
Austin and he has a full-blown
Oh.
idol.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw in an episode Austin said he trusts Drew, but he didn't tell him that fact. He didn't let him know, I think, so he might be the
Which
only
is
one
probably
who
why he's
knows.
still around because I'm pretty sure Drew would have been like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Especially
Mhm,
now that I feel like Drew is very much just like, oh, Emily, like you and me. Like, I wouldn't be
mhm.
surprised if next week we see Drew leaning more on Emily than Austin because Austin, he hasn't shown like prowess and like immunity challenges yet. But I mean, I have a feeling that once they throw something at him that's more like physically challenging, not just holding things or like staying on a pole, and I think that
Mhm.
he would dominate in those.
Well, and at the end of this week's episode, they show previews of the next one, where Emily wants D out, and Austin's like,
Mhm.
"No, absolutely not." And so there is a fracture coming in that group, it looks like. And so
Wow.
where will it fall? Who knows? We'll have to tune in for next week.
I know. Well, and I'm just thinking too, it's just like there's no moment of settling on this show. Like in 26 days, there's no moment of settling. I mean, it's like they're probably not sleeping very much. And so it's just
Right.
like they're always going to be activated and like a
Right.
little bit paranoid.
Yeah, just feeds into that. Now, this is a crossover comment, but and I know I've mentioned her so many times, but I just finished watching Big Brother. Suri was on both, and Julie Chen asked, "What is harder, Survivor or Big Brother?" And you might be surprised. She said Big Brother because she said in Survivor, you at least there are times where the cameras aren't on you, where you could go to another island where there's no one
Oh.
around, where you could go take a nap somewhere, you can escape. Whereas Big Brother, you were surrounded by 10, 20 cameras all at once, all the time, 24 hours a day. I thought that was such an interesting observation.
Yeah, because how can I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had very rare situations in my life where I felt like I was like watched for any length of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So it's like I don't really know what that's like. It's like another character in the game for them that they don't really
Mhm.
talk about.
I wonder I don't know. I wonder if at some point it just become you can become numb to it because your brain just can't keep checking on that, or maybe you
Mhm.
don't, but 100 days is how long Big Brother ran this time.
Wow.
Okay, I would worry when I forgot the cameras were on. I would say something really terrible. So having the awareness of the camera, like when we're on, we're at tribal, like that would be so helpful just to be like, this is when we shore up our brain cells.
Yeah. You might be right though that they forget about it because it's like unlike an actor who it's like, okay, look there, stand there,
Mhm.
where you have an active relationship with the camera. I
Yeah.
feel like on Survivor, there's no active relationship. Like they're aware of it, but then because they're not, doesn't seem like they're being constantly cued to look here, look there. Maybe at Tribal they are. I don't know. Um, that it would almost just like blend into the background.
It was interesting as a viewer. Was it last season or the couple of seasons ago where they said they were going to take Survivor behind the scenes? So we'd see them how they were setting things up. So that's a great
Mm.
example of an experiment in Survivor. I thought it was a great idea, but I haven't seen it since. So I'm thinking it
Yeah.
didn't play well. But I was hoping, could we talk about the Girls Alliance? I just feel very pulled to
Yes.
talk about this.
Yes, of
So they're on the
course.
beach. Women are looking around. They're like, there's six of us, and there's four of them, which is typically how the conversation of the Women's Alliance comes up, is that the women start
Mhm.
noticing they could be in the majority here. And it's a common theme that, like, at some point, and it also almost never works. And why I want to talk about it, because I think there is a narrative in society that women can't get along well, or they can't stick together, or they get catty. And I really want to kind of dispel that, or at least say, at least from my
Mm.
opinion, I don't think that's what's happening at all. I think my theory behind this is that women are so gifted at forming relationships. They're relationship ninjas. They have so many options. They have
Mm.
so many more options than the men typically do, who might be playing. Like in this example, the women are all on the beach talking about who to trust, what to do next. And they should pan to the men, assuming at the same time the men are talking about tacos, which is awesome. And having been married to a
Yeah.
man for 20 plus years, like that is kind of that's pretty common that the guys are going to talk about sports and food, and that's about as deep as we're going. So they have fewer men have fewer options, so it might seem like they're more loyal. I just think it's because they're not women are so good at creating relationships, which
Mm.
makes Emily a dangerous player. I think she's my favorite to win
Yeah.
because and it's so her interesting her role on the show has been so interesting. So very first episode, she calls out Bruce from across from she's on Lulu, he's on another tribe, and he's trying to say, "Oh, I'm not a threat. I haven't done this before." And Emily's like, "Well, actually, you're the only one telling us how to play this game, so you kind of are." And it was fantastic from a viewer's point of view.
Yes.
And then she repaired it. She worked with Caleb. Caleb kind of mentored her, and she figured out the social game that she hadn't figured out yet. And it seemed like it happened fast. And what's interesting as you watch her through the game, she becomes someone people want. They want her on their side. So wherever she goes, they want her vote, even if they don't need it. So, for example, in this episode, the Girls Alliance don't really need her. They have five without her,
Right.
but she gets drawn into that too, which I think just speaks so much to her social game that she's able to curry this. Now, she
Yeah.
ultimately doesn't stay with the Girls Alliance. And so we'll see what happens to her that afterwards. But I think it comes down to she's done such a good job building relationships. She has so many options. She really could work with the boys or she could work with the girls. And that's, I think, a testament to how well she's playing the game. I don't know if it's going to
Yeah.
be good enough, but it's so interesting.
It is so interesting. How much of this do you think is like Emily's actual go-to personality, and how much do you think of this is, oh, Caleb gave me some insight into being social into this game, so I should be more like this version that he has portrayed, like that has painted, like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a really good question. So my gut instinct is that when you're starving for 2 weeks with no sleep, like it's hard to hide who you really are.
Mm,
So my thought is that she is a very, very intelligent woman who in her line of work, I think she's a stocks investment person, like financial person, like her
yeah.
personality, not a problem because she's not really spinning it with people. She's numbers in her. So it might actually be a strength that she can focus so heavily on a task. And I think it shows how adaptable she is. She starts seeing the feedback that people don't want her, that they're giving her feedback that she's not included, they're excluding her. And all that together with Caleb wanting to mentor her, I think helped her. I'm guessing she had to be somewhat flexible, somewhat have insight and awareness that she was able to apply all that to do so well in the game, which is, I
Mm.
think, why I'm probably rooting for her.
I wonder then maybe it's if it's the opposite of what I just said. If in her everyday life she's suppressed some of these aspects of herself because everyone wants data, everyone wants the hard
Mhm.
hitting like facts, like just tell it how it is, Emily. Like we want you to tell it how it
Mhm.
is. And now here she is on the beach and like she's bringing out maybe the side of herself that like, oh, this isn't necessarily valued in my everyday work environment when I'm like socializing with people, but I see it's valued out here. And maybe it's just like a skill that she suppressed over the
Mhm.
years.
I would like to think. I would like to think that she's just so clever and adaptable, she figures out what works in any given situation. Now, we got a glimpse of her personality when she had a bite of her charcuterie board at the auction, and she starts twerking, which I would never guess. We didn't see concern. I just get the impression she's very conservative. I just had this impression. She's just very held together and professional. And when I saw her twerk, I was like, and she says, "This is the real Emily." I was like, "Oh,
Mm.
okay." So I think she just has a spectrum of personality and she figures out what fits best for the people she's in, which is her advantage because then we have people
Yeah.
like Bruce who have very little awareness of what's going on or don't seem to care, don't take notes. And it's a very different play.
Yeah. Yeah, the awareness is definitely different. It's interesting to see that contrast next to each other too. You have Emily who is like adapting as she goes. Like every episode, you almost learn a little bit more about her. You like
Mhm.
her a little bit more. I don't know that I've seen much in Bruce that has changed since the very first episode. The Bruce we had then
Mhm.
is pretty much the Bruce we have now today.
Mhm.
You
And
just
what
see him
we're
taking different
missing is, like,
actions.
his vulnerability. I think why people find
Yeah.
Emily so endearing is because we relate to her. We've all been the kid that nobody wanted to play with at some point and
Mhm.
struggled to find our group, and just her like, that was so endearing, very relatable, and then you wanna cheer for her because she does so well, versus Bruce kind of like he's sort of impenetrable. He's decided he's gonna be the old grumpy man, so he's not running after the bamboo shoots. He's kinda, like, playing by his
Mm.
own rules, which is interesting, but it's not like, oh, it's not quite as endearing, I guess, for me.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree with all of those things. So, I mean, I'll be interested to see what happens. I mean, Katura has been very steadfast in her dislike of Bruce and wanting him off. And I will say there's something about that in the game of Survivor that when somebody is just like kind of that, I don't want to say one note about something, but basically you can count on Katura and you can trust her that if the vote for Bruce comes up, she's going to be on it. She's going to be like, "Yes, I am your
Yeah.
number and I'm cheering for this." Um
I
which
think
could
that's
end up
to her
being the
downfall,
detriment of her
though.
game.
I
I
agree.
think so.
She's
Yeah.
so blinded to it that I think she's missing all the subtle dynamics of everything else that's happening, and I feel like I really want to root for her, but I think as long as she's fixated and she's gone I hate to be extremist, but I think she's gone too far in the game to go back. Like, even if Bruce were to
Mm.
leave next week, she's just been blinded by so much of the game, I'm not sure. So much of her game
Uh,
is in contrast to Bruce versus her standing on her own, making her own relationships, for example.
yeah, that is true. And I mean, you haven't really seen any scenes of Katura going, I want Bruce out right now, but I think it's better for the game to do X, Y, or Z. Like there really doesn't, you don't see many examples of that contrast of like, or more like kind of nuanced thinking about it of
Mhm.
like, okay, but big picture, it's kind of, yeah, you're seeing a very narrow view of the game.
Right, we don't get to know her because all her
Mm.
airtime is about how she doesn't like Bruce, and that's not helpful for her game.
No, no. I would be curious to know, like, if there was more going on. Surely there is. I mean, obviously, it's hard to see this many characters and the edit and all of that.
Yeah.
So, just wild. Well, there's a couple other like highlights from this episode to talk about. I don't know which one you're leaning
Jake!
towards going.
Oh, we gotta talk about
Yes.
Jake.
You're
Oh
like,
my gosh,
okay.
he's the star of this episode. It's hilarious. He's so funny. Where should we
Yeah.
start?
I mean, yeah, where do we start with Jake?
I mean, I'm curious what you think, why he went I don't know if this is leaning too much on the previous episode, but why I guess we do know why. Why he went against everyone in the last vote for Julie. I don't know if you talked about that in the last episode. He reveals he's like, if you have a group of 10, not everyone's going to get to the top. At
Yeah.
some point, someone has to make a move, which is always at this point where we're seeing drama. It's just like, when is it too soon
Yeah.
versus when is it right on time? I think
Yeah.
that's where he got caught up in with some people saying he didn't win in too soon. I don't feel strongly about it either
Okay.
way, but that's what he was thinking.
Yeah, and the honest goodness thing is like if it had worked for him, then it would have been like genius. Way to go, Jake. Timing
Yeah.
was perfect.
Yeah.
And it's just that
Mm.
assessment because it didn't work. Oh, it was too soon.
Yeah.
I was like, just you didn't get enough people to agree with you on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
when part of your plan is, though, we have to all be okay with going to rocks, which means anyone could leave the island. That is asking way too much for the other people you're with unless you really, really, really can trust them.
yeah. I can't think of many situations where everybody's like, yeah, sure, shrug.
Yeah.
rocks. I also
I'm
wonder
ready to
too.
go.
Yeah, I also wonder too is that like their trust in the game itself is probably flimsy because it's like, oh wait, most of the things that we know from being super fans are quite different on this season, and they haven't gone to Rocks yet. So how do they know that going to Rocks is the same as what the going to
Right.
Rocks used to be?
You're right. You could never count on anything on Survivor. Could all be new.
Yeah, so I could see that. I don't know. They didn't really like voice that, but I could see that also being in the back of people's minds of like, yeah, but do we really know? I mean, it could just very well have been like, yeah, now you're going to actually make fire. There's no going to Rocks, or you're going to do something else. I don't know if they would actually do that, but you never know. Like, I wouldn't be
Right.
shocked as a viewer to see something different. Were you surprised that Jake didn't go? I think you had said that earlier, but
Yeah, I was at home going, please don't send Jake home. Please don't. I love him as a character. He's so fun to watch. That Boston
yeah,
accent I find really charming.
yeah,
He's so interesting. He has a very interesting take on things. He's not found his groove in this tribe because the people he was close with, like Bruce, now don't trust him. And the girls for sure
hmm,
are not on his side. So he's not really found his home, but I guess I always root for the underdog. And I find him really interesting. He brings up a good question, like a coaching point of view, which is how do you know when to trust someone? Like, how do you decide? So there's a
hmm,
moment in this episode where the girl, Kelly and Katura, are trying to talk to him. Don't use your shot in the dark, Jake. Tell us who you want to vote for, Jake. And he's like, wait a second, you tell me who you want to vote for,
yeah,
which in Survivor is a very insightful mode. If people won't tell you who they're voting for, as Jake says, it's probably you. So
yeah,
he's getting the sense, and they're telling him not to use his shot in the dark, which is another red flag. No one's really talking to him about game. So he's kind of collecting all these clues, and he decides then, I've got to find this idol. So he runs off,
hmm,
and the couture is assigned to babysit him. I thought that was a very interesting, like
yeah,
reading the red flags in front of you, because it could be so easy to just ignore them because it's stressful to think, but just to be able to, and it on Survivor and in our own lives, like, but what if I paid attention to these signs?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where it goes from this episode because I mean, I do think there's a really big part of him that thought he was going to go. And if you think you're going to go, what are you
Yeah.
doing to keep yourself in the game if there's,
Mm.
89% of you thinks you're leaving that episode? So it's
Mhm.
like, now they're going back to the beach. And it's like, oh, I'm still here.
Yeah, because who knows what bombs he was dropping or whatever he was doing in the background thinking he was
Totally.
leaving. Although he was planning on playing the shot in the dark, so maybe he thought a part of him could stay. And his
Mm,
message at tribal council, I thought was a really good one. He's like, you can't, and this gets me. This gets me because I think this tribe
mhm.
has done this is they have, or that when it happens in Survivor land is when they don't plan on splitting the vote, when they purposely dogpile on one person. That is Survivor 101. You never do that because
Yeah.
they have so many advantages. Why they want to do that though is they don't want to like put their, bloody their hands with another contestant or bring more friction to it. But then may have no control because of all the surprises and advantages you don't know about. So he voiced, I think where tribal council's genius is it voice, even if the person does goes whether they go or not, it's immaterial, but they get to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion and strategy
Yes.
that can stay long past tribal council. So when he sat there and said, if everyone feels you're safe, one of you is making a terrible mistake. I thought, damn, that's the
Yeah.
lawyer in him coming out in a really powerful way.
Yeah. Well, and then he also had that amazing moment where he was just like, if I play my, uh, like,
Yeah. Oh, that was so good. We play
you
my
know,
idol
he
versus
got a couple
someone
people.
else's idol.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wonder though if it's just so hard to get a tribe split going because it's not only do you have to convince people on one person, you have to convince people on two people. And then you have to like actually trust that both groups are doing what they're going to say they're going to do and nobody's going to flip and all that. I'm like, I wonder if it's just like sometimes an organizational thing.
It's so hard. This is where it seems like a lot of the reality shows right now are very blocky. They're all voting in blocks, which just it's so confusing. But when we look at last week's episode, when Jake split early, the tribe came down on him hard. So there's a lot of messaging. You're safe in numbers. You're not if you don't. And if you don't
Yeah.
vote with us, you're next week's target. That's a message that's being played. So it makes sense that it would be hard to vote against the others, but at some point, there does have to be a switch. And I think it did happen in this episode when Drew Emily and Austin went against and got Kelly out, it started shifting the energy that now there is this minority that's pretty powerful because they're so tight because they made this really bold decision. And I think this is the time in the game. This is why I volunteered for this date, because this is the time in the game where the majority gets fractionated and that minority small group, because they did something really hard, they're very tight together, they tend to be the ones to go all the way to the end. So that's my prediction.
Yeah. Well,
See.
there's a lot of momentum at this point. So I have been thinking about this all afternoon. And how does somebody actually get blindsided on this game? Because it's like, at some point, if you don't win, you're going to be voted off. So, how do you go into tribal council with not half a thought like it could be me today? Like,
Mm.
when you see Kelly at the end there was almost probably 0% of her that thought it was going to be her. And she's blindsided, like truly, like you see a range of emotions on her face
Mhm.
from shock to confused to disappointed to like
Kendra
despair
is
to
crying.
accusatory. Yeah. So it's like, I'm just kind of amazed at this point in Survivor that like somebody could truly be blindsided to the point of they might be questioning things after the fact for themselves. Like, how did I not see that? I don't know. What do you
I
think?
thought that was I thought it was so interesting. I had the same thought because I was like, "Okay, Jake is so surprised. There's no way they could have told Jake ahead of time. He wouldn't be this surprised." But they needed him to be this surprise so Kendra would feel or Kelly would feel so safe. And I think once you
Mm,
start telling Jake and then Jake's like, "Okay, let me go tell Bruce," and then Bruce tells I think the genius of the Drew, Austin, Emily blindside here was that they were able to keep it very, very small so no one could find out about it ahead of time.
wow. I mean, it had to have been something because I've never seen someone as shocked as she was. I mean, I think that's probably why they did what they did in editing, just so that we could feel a little bit of maybe what Kelly felt to be
Mhm.
blindsided. Because I was just like, how is it Kelly? Um, and I'm like so curious to know more. But yeah, I mean, and, like, how could you not leave this and then be like very suspicious of whoever orchestrated that move?
Yeah. Well, when Kelly turned around and looked at Emily, and Emily said, I forgot what Emily said. Emily said something kind of neutral, but she said it in a way like, please forgive me, is the body language she had.
Yeah.
And Kelly looked at her and said, it was you, wasn't it? And I was like, oh my gosh, she just stabbed Emily in the heart.
Yeah.
Like she
And
just
he's like,
realized she put it all together.
oh my gosh. And that's kind of like seemed very outside of Kelly's personality to just be like um accusatory or like, just kind of like but she was just so like raw and in the moment. I mean, she didn't even remember to bring her torch up to Jeff when she walked up to get it
Yeah.
snuffed. Like she
Yeah.
pulled herself together eventually, but it was such a raw emotional moment for her. It was just like such a surprise to see. And I was just like, you
So who do
you
you give
obviously
credit for doing that
I
surprise?
don't know. I mean, I think we're gonna see more next week.
Yeah.
It's got to be some combination Drew, Austin, Emily.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
have to believe Austin was pushing for it though, just because of the amulet thing that they didn't really show.
Mhm.
Um, who else was involved in the vote besides those three?
I had that voted for Jake were Kelly, Kendra, and Katura, so everybody else and Bruce
So
didn't have a vote.
D and
So
Julie,
D and Julie. I don't yeah, yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
would have
So it's interesting, like, will that be the next group? D, Julie, Drew, Austin,
got to
and
be.
Emily.
Yeah. I think the very interesting thing about Emily's game though is I don't think anybody will see her as the mastermind on that. She might have been. I mean, Drew was the first one to whisper it.
Yeah, I
So,
that is the question I have, like, who was behind that? Because whoever was is very likely to go to the end because that's just such a masterful move, and I don't know who because every time they showed something I mean, even though Drew whispered it, Kelly said it first in front of a group of people, so someone in w did
yeah.
one person in that group when Kelly said it say, "Yes, that's what we have to do," and then whispered it to Drew, and then Drew said it. Who knows? Maybe we'll find out next week, but that would be I would love to know who came up with that
Oh, I
idea.
would love to know. I mean, this is great for Bruce's game though, because at this point it's going to be like, well, Bruce is like, look at what Bruce did last week. He like The auction, the
I wanna
this,
s
the that.
yeah, and I wanna say that I was so championing Bruce and Julie at that immunity trial, like, the 2 people at the very
Yes.
end were the 2 oldest people, 1 woman, 1 man. I was just like, "You know, whatever you feel for Bruce." I was like, "Good
Yes.
for you, Bruce. Good for you."
Oh my gosh. I know we didn't even get to talk about that immunity challenge with Jeff stabbing the rice. So dramatic. But honestly, I thought the same thing too because and I had to check my bias because ahead of that immunity challenge, I'm always just like, who do I think's going to win? I was like, oh, it's probably going to be like Austin. It's
Yeah, yeah.
probably going to be,
Mhm.
like one of these younger athletic people, and that was not who it is. So it really like speaks to how anyone could win any of these challenges, but it's like this is something beyond strength, like physical strength that somebody's drawing
Yeah.
from when they win these challenges.
You know, the thing I've noticed with these, like, really, really hard challenges and there's a bias here, but when they ask the contestants, like, "What were you thinking of?" So many of them, they'll tell you, "I was thinking about my daughter. I was thinking about my wife." And it's like once the human brain and this is powerful for coaching too, once you kinda lock in onto this larger, like, celestial, like, life purpose, your brain almost won't let you quit, which is a beautiful thing to see. Now, maybe everybody else who dropped are thinking about their sister too, but it just seems to be like a theme when they interview these people. They like they're just really connected to their family in that moment.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
No, you're absolutely right. It is very rare that you, when he does ask that question, that it's just like, oh, I just wanted to win. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
also like a valid reason to just be like, I just wanted to like win an
Yeah.
immunity challenge on Survivor and be like
Mhm.
super proud of myself. Valid
Especially
reason,
him
but
because he lost his vote.
totally. Yeah.
But I don't think it would have been an I don't know. My guess is I'd like to believe the romantic in me is like, I'd like to believe that or maybe just like working with a lot of humans, wanting it for ourselves often. I mean, I would love for that to be enough, but oftentimes it isn't. But it's
Yeah.
this thought of, well, let me negotiate for my raise because of my kids, because of my
Right.
family life, because I want to help my mom. And when we identify with it's not just us, it's others, it becomes so much more powerful in how we show up.
Oh, that's such a good point. I feel like we could talk about this for another hour. We are at time for today. Um, where can people find you online if they wanted to go find you?
Sure. Well, I have one reality-based podcast that they might be interested. They love
Yes.
90 Days. And maybe perhaps this one, if you'll let me, I'll put it on my podcast too. I have my own
Yes.
podcast. It's Happy in Medicine, and it's not just for doctors. You'll find something you'll relate to there. And then my website is yourpathandfocus.com.
Amazing. And I'll have those links, including the link to your 90 Day Fiance one in the show notes. And Christina, it was so lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lynn.
All right.